So good morning, good morning. I know some of you are still coming in. If you could please take your seats. You're so energized even without the caffeine. This is great. So good morning, everyone. We've got an amazing program. I know that many of you are still making your way to your seats. Please find those. We're going to go ahead and get started though, so that we can make sure that there is enough time for everything. I am delighted to welcome you to Northern Virginia Community College's Annandale campus. I am Ann Kress, the president of what we call NOVA. I know I've talked to several of you this morning who did not even know this campus was here. It is our second largest campus. NOVA has 6 campuses. We serve about 75,000 students every single year. We're the 3rd largest community college in the country. And this morning, we are delighted to be the home for the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia's 6th annual conference. That's worthy of applause. 6th annual conference. This year, focusing on the aging of Northern Virginia. We are one of 14 co-sponsors of this morning's program, and we are delighted to have many partnerships with the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia. And could you please join me in thanking its CEO, Eileen Ellsworth, for her amazing work in this community. Every year for the past 6 years, the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia has brought the community together to talk about pressing issues that are facing the Northern Virginia region. And one of the reasons that NOVA is so excited to be one of the hosts for today's discussion is because of what we see is our role in helping Northern Virginia address the issue of aging in place. We have continued to expand our workforce development programs that support those who are aging in Northern Virginia, and some of our great employer partners are here with us this morning. We also see amongst the students who come to NOVA every year close to 1,000 individuals over 60, many of whom are taking advantage of the senior audits that the Commonwealth of Virginia supports. Many others are part of the lifelong learning institutes that are hosted at a number of our campuses, including the Annandale campus. We reflect the full diversity of our community. In fact, last year, one of the folks who walked across the stage at our commencement ceremony was an individual who was 80 years old who had finally achieved their associate degree. So we know that as all of us, including myself, live longer lives, live richer lives, there's so much that we have that we can do with multiple lives within what used to be maybe one single journey. And the other thing I would say is we welcome that expertise back on our campus. So we are very excited about the discussion that will occur here this morning. Also know that this is going to be an interactive presentation. I think everyone got some cards and you'll be told what to do with those a little later. But right now, I am pleased to introduce Melinda Merck, who is a member of the board of the Community Foundation and an estates, trust, and tax attorney at the law firm McClandis Lillard, and which is also a proud sponsor of this morning's event. Perhaps most significantly, Melinda is also a donor to the Community Foundation's Permanent Fund. Again, welcome to NOVA. Thank you for joining in this important discussion, and please join me in welcoming Melinda.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Dr. Kress, for that kind introduction, and to NOVA for hosting us this morning. It's my honor and my pleasure just to welcome everyone, not only here in person, but the many folks who are joining us virtually online. As Dr. Kress mentioned, this is our 6th annual Shape of the Region event, and since its inception in 2018, when I became a board member, this annual event has showcased thought leaders and offered broad perspectives on common challenges and themes that affect our local community. So many of you may recall last year, our topic focused on the issue of mental health. And this was particularly timely having coming out of the COVID pandemic. And this was then followed by 2 data-driven reports produced by Insight Region, which is the Foundation Center for Community Research, to further quantify the extent of the mental health crisis in our region. So in response to last year's Shape of the Region, the Community Foundation championed several projects toward improving our region's mental health, and I'll just run through a few of those accomplishments. We raised $121,000 to build the first permanent fund dedicated to the mental health needs of Northern Virginians, convened 17 regional partners to seek solutions and to help build awareness and training and training resources across the region. We presented key findings and highlights from our Finding Our Way Back to Mental Health to several regional and statewide audiences. And we also provided mental health training for Community Foundation staff and as well as regional partners to aim towards increasing awareness and pathways to more effective treatment of mental health. The Foundation's focus on mental health also inspired the development of a mental health working group funded by the Virginia Funders Collaborative and led by the PATH Foundation, focused on improving access to mental health resources for children and young adults through the Virginia Mental Health Access Program, or VMAP, which provides education and training to primary care providers to better screen, diagnose, manage, and treat mental health issues among youth across the Commonwealth. So this year we turn our attention to the needs of our region's growing aging population, which, like mental health, affects nearly every one of us, as well as our family members, friends, co-workers, neighbors, and our local community. So it's often said it takes a village to address these important issues. And we thank you all for taking part in today's program. We welcome you, as Dr. Kress mentioned, to submit your questions to our speakers and panelists. And with that, I am now pleased to welcome and introduce our host for this morning, NBC4 Northern Virginia reporter Drew Wilder.
Thank you, Melinda. Good morning, everyone. My name is Drew. I cover Northern Virginia for NBC4. Get this set. Mic is usually not something that I desperately need. Volume controls struggle for me. But hopefully that helps get you excited. This is going to be a great event. I helped out with last year's event, and it was tremendous. I learned a lot. I know everybody in attendance learned a lot, and most importantly, we did some really good things for Northern Virginia on the topic of mental health. And this year is going to be more of the same. Thank you for waking up with us and coming out here. Thanks to everyone who joined on Zoom. We're expecting about 300 guests today, so this is really tremendous. Apologies that, again, there wasn't any coffee this morning. I'm told it's coming. So I'm trying to be your coffee right now and get you a little hyped up. I could use some of those gratuitous news graphics, like, bam, tonight, no coffee. Will they survive the conference? That guy needs a beard. But thank you guys so much. For those of you that are joining us in person this year here at the Ernst Cultural Center, you're going to hear a lot of really important points, both data and experiential, about aging here in our community and why this should be a focus for all of us, regardless of age, regardless of industry or profession. So thank you so much for joining us here in person and for those that are joining us via Zoom. So as was mentioned, this year's event is called Aging in Northern Virginia. And a couple of data points to get us started. Contrary to popular perception, only about 6.5% of older Northern Virginians move in any given year, and only about 2.6% of them actually leave the state. So an overwhelming majority age in place, right here where they are, our neighbors, the people who live across the street from us, our parents, our loved ones, typically staying here as they're getting older. And that constitutes an ever-growing percentage of our local demographic. So today we're going to talk a little bit about who these people are, what they need, and what all of us can do to help them. The Community Foundation is co-presenting the Shape of the Region Conference with 14 regional partners. We're showing them now on your screen there. These partners represent all sectors of Northern Virginia region, business, philanthropy, education, and government, and they are a reflection of the impact of our theme in all areas of life. So thank you to each and every organizational partner today. We appreciate you. And of course, we always got to thank our sponsors. Thank you so much to the 2023 Shape of the Region sponsors who have made today's event possible. We want to say a thank you to the venue sponsor, of course, Northern Virginia Community College, our community sponsors, Bank of America, Dominion Energy, and George Mason University. And our engagement sponsors this year, American Psychiatric Association Foundation, Care First, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Fairfax County Economic Development Authority, Green Spring Senior Living, Deborah Thompson Johnson, who is an author, speaker, and writer, the McCandlish Lillard, Odin Feldman and Pittleman, Southern Made Home Care, the Mather, and Washington Gas. Thank you all to our sponsors. We also want to recognize our elected officials who were kind enough to join us this morning for this year's conference. We'll recognize them at this time. Virginia Senator Jennifer Boysko, representing the 33rd District. Virginia Delegate Ken Plume, representing the 36th District. Delegate Holly Siebold, the 35th District. Delegate Vivian Watts from the 39th District. Jeff McKay, who is the chair of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. Phyllis Randall, chair of the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors. Ann Wheeler, chair of Prince William County Board of Supervisors. Victor Angry from the Prince William County Board. Matt DeFerranti, Arlington County Supervisor. Pat Harity, Fairfax County Supervisor. Dalia Palchik, Fairfax County Supervisor. Nalia Alam, council member from the town of Herndon. Cindy Fithian, council member from the town of Occoquan. Debbie Hiscott, council member from the city of Falls Church. Aaron Rayner, who's a council member in Percival. John Taylor Chapman, council member, city of Alexandria. Oriella Mejia, regional director for Senator Tim Kaine. And am I hitting buttons? Oh, I'm hitting buttons. Thank you, Tara. You guys you just yell at me. That's fine. People do that at work and my wife does it all the time. It's very much encouraged. I need it. Picking up where we left off there, Tanaya Talato, who is the regional director for Senator Mark Warner, and Ted Sorrell, the chief of staff for Virginia Delegate Elizabeth Bennett. Thank you all to our elected leaders and representatives. So again, I touched on this earlier. I just want to say on behalf of myself personally and on behalf of News 4, we're very proud to partner with the Community Foundation in these events. This is the pulse of our community, the type of work the Community Foundation does that all of you in attendance here do and partner with. This keeps us moving forward. This is what makes our community vibrant. This is what attracts people like myself from the Midwest to want to be here, to want to engage in this community, and to want to raise a family here, because we're working on improving the quality of our lives, not only for ourselves, but for our parents, for our children, and for the lives that hopefully they will experience here. So News 4 is really glad to be a partner as we were last year, and also again this year. So thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here this morning. So now it's my pleasure to welcome Elizabeth Hughes to the stage. Elizabeth is the Senior Director of Insight Region, the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia's Center for Community Research, which launched back in 2020. She is the author of the report that you all received this morning and many others produced by the Community Foundation these past 3 years. For those of you on Zoom, there will be a link that will be shared so you can get a digital copy of that report. You'll absolutely want to look at that. It's very thorough. It's very well researched and put together. Elizabeth has spent her career at the intersection of research and policy. She's helped decision makers sort through the noise, finding relevant, actionable insights to help guide operations, maximize productivity, and achieve strategic goals. Before she joined the Community Foundation, she served as a researcher for the Pew Charitable Trust and the Urban Institute. Please welcome Elizabeth.
morning. Thank you, Drew. I will adjust the mic a little bit. I'm proud to be in front of you today to once again share what we have learned from our latest Insight Region report. Last year, we examined the shape of mental health in our region, a topic that, at least historically, many have shied away from discussing. We shed light on the reality of the issue, encouraged not only action, but acceptance. It's okay to not be okay. The topic of aging is different, but in many ways similar. We just don't talk about it. What is happening to our parents, our friends, our spouses, and ourselves over time? My goal today is to provide an overview of the data from our latest Insight Region report, Growing Old Together in Northern Virginia, to frame today's conversation, and to keep pushing for acceptance. It's also okay to be getting older. Our latest report picks up where we left off in 2014, when the Community Foundation commissioned its first report on aging in Northern Virginia. The report's author predicted a precipitous increase in the population aged 65 and over. And as expected, the region is now home to over 300,000 older adults, a 61% increase between 2010 and 2020. While this silvering of society is happening across the country and around the world, the rate of growth for Northern Virginia is actually quite high. It's the 6th highest among the 50 largest metro areas in the entire country. During the same time, our working age population grew by just 8%. And if you look at the delta between those numbers, we have the 3rd largest relative increase in our older population. Northern Virginia still has a relatively small portion of its total population that is older, but it's a very fast growing segment. When we talk about any kind of demographic shift over time, it's important to ask whether the residents themselves are changing, or new people are moving in with different characteristics. When it comes to aging, it is decidedly the former. The growth on our older population is primarily due to aging in place, not transplants from another metro area. In 2021, as the speakers have already alluded to, just 6.5% of older adults moved houses at all, and a fraction, which is about 10,000 people, because we're dealing with a large number of people, actually left the area, most of whom were replaced by older movers into the area. While older movers in Northern Virginia are much more likely than the average older American to have left the state, in the end, the vast majority are not moving at all. As the local population of older adults grows, their needs and priorities may become more apparent at scale. What are those priorities? So you can actually look at data on why people move, even if those moves are uncommon, to understand how priorities shift over time. If you look at, I don't know if anybody can see this, but if you look at this clustering at the bottom, those are the reasons why younger movers tend to move. And it's what you might think of. It's better, higher quality neighborhoods, larger houses, job proximity or better jobs. They're focused on housing, neighborhoods, and jobs. When it comes to older residents, the predominant reason that they move is to be closer to family. I think it's around 40% of older movers are moving to be close to family. The other reasons are related to housing costs, so affordability, and also aspects of home and accessibility. And these 3 reasons provide the structure of the report that's in your hand or on your computer today, and also our conversation today. I wanted to start our discussion of the family priority with a pop quiz. I'm going to read each question, and I just want you to think about how you would answer, so don't put up your hands unless you're inclined to. But this is more of a self-reflection exercise. Do you currently consider yourself a caregiver? Do you live with or near one or more human beings to whom you're bound by biology, marriage, adoption, love, community? Do you cook meals, launder clothes, pick up groceries, look up information, transport, or pay bills for those individuals at least once a week? Do you currently consider yourself a caregiver? So I say all of this as a reminder that caregiving is not some specialized task. It's really part of being a family and living in a household. It doesn't just mean that you're helping another human being with basic survival like bathing, eating, and walking. Those are known as activities of daily living, and they're what those that have critical limitations need. But there's this other group known as instrumental activities, and that's doing things like cooking dinner or doing the laundry for another person. It's chores. It's a natural offshoot of being in a family or a household together. Sometimes the division of labor is equal. Sometimes we find ourselves primarily as the givers or the recipients. But whatever the division, if you lived with or near family, it's likely that at least occasionally someone is preparing a meal that you consume or you're washing someone else's clothes. When it comes to older adults, their need for help with these activities is rising at the same time that they are less likely to be living with a family who can provide that help informally. So if you see from the chart, this is a graph of how many individuals are living with one or more family members, and that's in the greenish gold line. And then you can see the percentage of Americans that have a major disability. This is not necessarily a limitation, but a very major disability. And then the percent that fall into both categories. So an individual who is 70, 8% of them are living alone and with a major disability. And that rate actually doubles in each subsequent decade. 17% of 80-year-olds and 40% of 90-year-olds are both living without any resident family and with a major disability. All told, over the course of our lives, at least 2/3 of us, regardless of race, wealth, or earlier health status, can expect to have a need for long-term care, physical help from another human being, and 1 in 4 will have these needs for 4 or more years. Families are the traditional source of physical help and caregiving, but many older adults are solo aging. They do not have family available to fulfill a caregiving role, or they do not wish to rely on these individuals for those needs. In our report, we talk about individuals who are solo aging due to both biology, so that's not having any children, but also due to circumstance, such as those children who do not live nearby. Nationally, an estimated 17% of older adults, that's about 1 in 6, do not have any children. And the rates are actually higher among those that are approaching retirement age, so we can expect this population to grow over time. Further, in the DC metro area, approximately 1 in 3 kids who grew up here have left, with the majority of them leaving the 3 states of Virginia, DC, and Maryland. Even those that do have family nearby may not be able to have their care needs met through these informal systems. And I believe our keynotes are going to dive deeper into some of these other barriers that family caregivers have to fulfilling all of the caregiving duties. But you can see, hopefully, this chart at the bottom shows what percentage of caregivers are in fair or poor health, are currently actively parenting while caregiving for an older adult, are in school, are working full-time, are under financial strain or taking on financial risk, and then those that are in very physically or emotionally stressful caregiving roles. The alternative is paid help, but the supply is actually very limited in this area. In 2021, there were just over 35,000 registered home health aides, which is a ratio of about 41 for every 1,000 residents over the age of 65. In Northern Virginia, the rate is actually a little bit lower. All right, I'm ready for my next pop quiz, and this one is around the second priority of home. Is your current home equipped for you to age in place? Does your home have a single level with a kitchen, full bathroom, bedroom, laundry, and step-free exit to the outside? If you found yourself living alone or unable to drive, could you manage in this home on your own? Is your current home equipped for you to age in place? By age 70, 69% of people have some limitation in daily living, but the majority do not need physical help. Why? They can accommodate those limitations with the use of a medical device or change in activity. So if you think about somebody who's beginning to experience knee pain and finding it difficult to walk, they might use a cane, which is a medical device. They may consolidate errands, so change in activity. They might use a delivery service, or they might add a modification to their home, like a seat in the shower. These are accommodations that facilitate continued independence. but the ability to accommodate is deeply tied to overall accessibility and modifiability of one's home. Homes that are a good fit with your physical and cognitive needs are easier to navigate and to exit without needing another human being's help. As we talked about earlier, most older Northern Virginians are not moving, and the majority have lived in their home for 20 years or more, and about 30% have lived in the same house for 30 years or more. They are aging in place, to be sure, but not necessarily in homes that can accommodate their changing needs. For example, about 1 in 6 older Northern Virginians occupy a townhouse, and a third live in a single-family home built before 1980, which is the threshold of when things became more accessible and modifiable. A subset of those who age in place can be described as stuck in place. They want to move, but cannot find a new home that will satisfy their accessibility needs. This is really an issue related to the housing stock locally. In the US, over half of homes lack basic accessibility features, such as a step-free entrance, an entry-level bedroom, and an entry-level bathroom, and the rates are actually lower in this region than they are nationally. All right. Last pop quiz of the day. This is around the budget priority and affordability. Is your retirement income healthy enough to age in Northern Virginia? A healthy 40-year-old couple today is expected to have medical costs that are 50% higher than the amount they receive in Social Security. Do you have other sources of income? The median cost of living with around-the-clock help from a paid caregiver is $23,000 each month. Can you prepare for these costs now? Is your retirement income healthy enough to age in Northern Virginia? Older adults in Northern Virginia need around $2,700 each month to cover their basic needs for housing, food, medical, transit, and other necessities. There is a pretty wide range in the budget cost related to the cost of housing. So individuals who own their home outright spend about $1,000 less each month than those who rent or are carrying a mortgage. This is good for their financial health, but it may also prevent them from moving to a better, more accessible home. They too may be stuck in place. Medical costs, which I mentioned in the pop quiz, are the largest non-housing expense for an older budget, but that is generally not due to differences in underlying health or need, but the cost of premiums. And those costs are expected to grow precipitously in the coming years, in part due to the past year's inflation, which will eat away at an increasing share of Social Security income. So that's this little chart at the bottom that shows that a healthy couple in their 60s will spend 71% of Social Security on medical costs. Healthy couple now in their 50s will spend 93% of their Social Security on healthcare costs. And then a healthy couple in their 40s now will spend 156%, so more than they have of Social Security on medical, to the tune of about $1.8 million over the course of their lives. This budget estimate of $2,700, which most older households in Northern Virginia can actually afford, does not include long-term care costs. That is physical help with activities of daily living from a paid caregiver. Adding in just 10 hours a week of paid caregiving increases your monthly budget to $4,000 per month. Standard care of 44 hours per week raises that total to $8,000. Around-the-clock care rises to $23,000, which just a fraction, 10% of older households can afford. Alternative options like independent and assisted living are also affordable to a minority of older residents. Our report looks at how Northern Virginia ranks across these 3 factors I mentioned. So looking at family, looking at home in terms of accessibility, and looking at budget and affordability. We found that when it comes to family and proximity to support, older adults have a relatively high level of spousal support in the sense that they're married or cohabiting at higher rates than other metro areas, but may be at risk when it comes to the presence of adult children and paid care. And this is relative to the 15 largest metro areas in the country. So Northern Virginia and the DC area ranked at the bottom for adult children still living locally, and we rated 14 for the supply of paid caregivers relative to the size of our older population. When it comes to housing accessibility, which is that middle column, we are mid to low with relatively low rates of step-free entrances and entry-level bathrooms. Most of our homes are not built to accommodate changing needs. Budget-wise, the cost of living is relatively high, but most older adults are able to afford these costs before you factor in long-term care. What do we do? Our report scratches the surface on how Northern Virginia can begin to tackle these issues, but I wanted to leave with a set of questions to prompt additional conversation and thinking. For the family priority, how do we make it easier to enter and remain in a caregiving role? For home, how do we increase the supply of accessible, affordable housing for older adults and ourselves? And for the budget priority, how do we help individuals afford to age in a place of their choosing? I'll turn it back to Drew to introduce you to your next keynote. Thank you.
I told you guys that was well-researched and thorough, right? Fantastic work, as always, Elizabeth. And you know, we take all that in, and it's really impressive work and helpful data. But I know I speak for myself and probably the rest of us who don't work in the aging space. You see that data and wow, whoa, right? Like we do have an issue that does need to be addressed. Thankfully, we have a couple of keynote speakers here today who can take us a little bit deeper into what some of the nuanced issues are and some creative ways that we can help all of us here be a part of making sure that we're supporting our neighbors and our families as they're getting older. So first, we want to welcome our first keynote speaker to the stage, Rita Choula. She is a Senior Director of Caregiving with the AARP Public Policy Institute. In her role, she drives the strategic direction and development of family caregiving initiatives within AARP and in partnership with a range of external stakeholders. Rita bridges policy to practice, centered on identifying and supporting needs of diverse family caregivers across race, ethnicities, cultures, and generations. Give a warm welcome to Rita.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you today, both here in person and virtually. I'd love to thank the organizers, the Community Foundation for Northern Virginia for organizing this conference, and more specifically for focusing in on aging this year. I'd also like to give a warm thank you to my colleagues with AARP Virginia that are here and participating virtually today. Thank you so much for all that you do for older adults and their caregivers across Virginia. Before I get started, I really wanted to just share a little bit of my story. As you can see, I'm all in with family caregiving, and much of that has to do with my own personal story. My mother, unfortunately, lived with frontotemporal dementia, and we cared for her for 15 years after a misdiagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. 8 of those years, I was a sandwich generation caregiver. My children were born into a caregiving situation, and for many years, I carried a heavy load, literally and figuratively. I was caring for my mother while carrying a baby and a toddler, carrying a baby on one side, a toddler on another, and working at the same time. Myself, like so many caregivers across this country, had the, I guess, sometimes unfortunate role of really navigating very broken long-term care and healthcare systems in order to provide dignity to the person that we were caring for. As you can see here, we tried to give dignity to my mother. She lived with us in community until we could no longer afford it. and until there was no longer the opportunity to have those proper supports in community. We then had her live in a nursing home, which unfortunately the nursing homes in our community were not where my mother could live and where she could not be cared for properly. And so we traveled 30 miles weekly to visit her and ensure that she really received that best care. And so many individuals across this country, including Virginia, have those same, are in that same situation. And that's why it's so important for us that as we talk about aging, we can't have this conversation without talking about the impacts of those that care for those who are aging. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to shave some of my slides. So if you see me go through, skip over a slide, it's because Elizabeth did such a fantastic job covering so much. The family caregivers, I won't go into detail here because Elizabeth did talk about family caregivers being individuals who provide support with ADLs, who provide support with IADLs. What I will emphasize here is that in addition to those things, family caregivers are also providing very complex care. We often don't think about that family caregiver who is now at home after a hospital discharge, that is changing catheters, that is preparing special diets, that is performing very difficult wound care. As a colleague of mine, Susan Reinhardt, says, that would make nursing students shudder. And all of a sudden, we're now asking family caregivers with little to no instruction to go home and do this. It's very important that we recognize how crucial family caregivers are to the health and economic and social well-being, not only of themselves, but of the people that they care for. 95% of all older adults that are receiving these supports are receiving them from family members or close friends. In addition to handling medical nursing tasks and other roles, they're also 60% are working. And so what we like to say is so many caregivers are working full-time or part-time, and then they go home to another part-time job, an unpaid part-time job at that. In addition to handling more medical type things, family caregivers are also the main advocates in the lives of those that they're caring for. They're managing health insurance claims, they're communicating and coordinating care with healthcare professionals and social service providers, and they're also providing transportation to medical appointments. AARP Public Policy Institute just 2 weeks ago released a new study valuing the invaluable. In 2017, we found that the estimated economic value of the unpaid care family caregivers provide across this country was $470 billion. In 2021, it rose to $600 billion. That is more than all out-of-pocket healthcare costs paid in this country in 2021. In Virginia, there are currently 900, as of 2021, 980 million family caregivers. They're providing 920 million hours of unpaid care. And the estimated economic value of that unpaid care is $14.3 billion. And so if you look at yourself as a caregiver and you say, I'm just doing this out of love, you may be doing this out of love, but look at the impact that you are having and that unpaid care is having on the systems. The systems that are already broken would be very broken without family caregivers. This is a conservative amount because it does not take into account the out-of-pocket costs that many family caregivers face. On average, it's $7,000 out of pocket that family caregivers are spending, and that number can vary depending on race and ethnicity. Family caregivers are very broad. We tend to just think of, a woman, a daughter, a wife taking care of someone, when in reality, it's much more diverse than that. Increasingly, men are taking care or being family caregivers. It's across generations. We see younger millennials and Gen Zers that are providing that care, as well as race and ethnicity. It's not just a white woman caring for her mother, as the average is talked about in research, but it's across diversity. It's across race and ethnicities. And with that, the supports that these caregivers need really need to reflect who they are as individuals. So we all remember COVID. We still have COVID. I remember it very clearly because my mom was in a nursing home. And for the 8 months preceding her death, excuse me, I could not talk, I could not connect with her. I could not physically touch her. From March, my last visit with her in March, to the time that she died in October 2020, that day, I spent 10 hours with her, but unfortunately, I was fortunately able to be snuck in to spend 10 hours before she passed. And that was the last time I was able to physically connect with her. And my story is that story of so many people across this country. This picture here is what we did for several months. We connected with her through a glass. It's something I will never forget. And hopefully it provides impacts and changes to how we do things in the future. More than half of caregivers experienced disruptions to care arrangements during COVID. This was particularly apparent in younger caregivers, in Black communities, and in Latino communities. 40% of caregivers faced increased hours of care. And caregivers under 40 were more likely to take on higher hours of care and doing more care. And for caregivers of someone in a nursing home, 70%, I was fortunate, as I said, were unable to visit or provide any care. I want to talk just a little bit about balancing work and care. Oftentimes we talk about the supports that are needed to help working caregivers. Without workplace benefits to support caregivers, it becomes increasingly difficult to do that role. And we see many caregivers that are then having to leave the workforce. We need better policies that allow paid sick days for family caregivers, paid family leave. We also need very tangible things, such as being able to access employee counseling services and knowing that there's respite care to provide backup for when you need some time off. I talked a little bit about caregivers who were younger. We really see that sandwich generation of caregivers is changing. We used to look at sandwich caregivers as someone having a child in college and then taking care of an older adult. But as caregivers get younger, we see that they are taking care of infants, they are taking care of toddlers, elementary age children, while balancing that care for older adults. It's very important that as we look at supports and developing policies, that it's these individuals that we keep in mind as we do this. I want to jump very quickly in my time remaining to talk about some of those policies. I really want to cover the National Strategy to Support Family Caregivers, which is a national policy. These are recommendations that came out of the Raise Family Caregivers Act. They are actionable things, actionable recommendations. There are over 500 of them that can take place at the state level, at the federal level, at the local level, and within private sectors. The goals, there's 5 of them around this national strategy, is to increase awareness of and outreach to family caregivers, advance partnerships and engagement with family caregivers, strengthen services and supports of those family caregivers, ensure financial and workplace security, and expand data, research, and evidence-based practices. It's very critical that we know who we're trying to support. So often, and many of you here are able to really look at this national strategy and look at these recommendations and figure out a way within your own organizations where you can increase or bolster what you may currently be doing for family caregivers. One such policy that is a very state-based policy, and Virginia is one of those states that has the CARE Act. The Caregiver Advise, Record, and Enable Act is a very local policy where health systems can better support family caregivers. And I know my AARP Virginia colleagues are advocating and working to implement this with health systems across the state. In closing, I want to just talk very quickly about what needs to happen. Family caregiving comes at a cost. We need to strengthen supports for family caregivers who face that cost of care, both opportunity through financial supports and health and well-being. And so my call to action for each of you sitting here today or attending virtually is to look at your own organization, to look at your legislation, and really think about not just the older adult, but also that family member, that friend, that neighbor who is providing that care. Because without that person, things get a lot more expensive and things become a lot more intangible for that older adult. So thank you so much for your time.
This again?
Yes.
There you go. All right, thank you so much, Rita. We're going to bring on our next keynote speaker, Melissa Andrews. She is the president and CEO of LeadingAge Virginia, which is an association of not-for-profit aging services providers serving an entire continuum, expanding the world of possibilities for aging. Their vision of positive aging for each Virginian is one that they seek to attain through advocacy, education, and establishing a leadership position within the Commonwealth. Please welcome Melissa.
Can we change that graphic? I don't have slides. I don't need you looking at two of me. Good morning. Thank you to the Community Foundation, not only for inviting me to participate today, but for focusing on the issue that universally affects all of us and yet gets little attention: aging. Did you know that in 1995, wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park after 70 years absence? It was a controversial decision, but the land was in trouble, so the rangers took the risk. During the 70 years that the wolves were not present, the deer population in the park had skyrocketed. With the deer in charge, riverbanks eroded because vegetation was greatly reduced. Once a small number of wolves arrived, big changes started happening immediately. First, they thinned out the deer presence through hunting, but the wolves did inspire the deer to change their behavior. The deer started avoiding the places where the wolves were, so the vegetation regenerated. Birds and beavers started moving in, as did other species. Trees grew, riverbanks stabilized, and rivers strengthened. The plant and animal ecosystem changed, all because of the wolf's presence. The wolves, who were feared by many to be a threat to the system, became the system's salvation. I recently heard that story recapped by U.S. women's gold medalist, soccer star, podcaster, and author Abby Wambach in her book, Wolfpack. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. The ecosystem was eroding. They had to do something drastic. That really resonated with me because, like Yellowstone National Park, the aging ecosystem is eroded in Virginia. And that erosion has happened due to neglect, ambivalence, fear, and perhaps through a general hope that it would all just work out. An ecosystem is a complex network, and that is how we should be looking at aging and aging services and supports. But instead, we often relegate it to silos. We look at caregivers, we look at the workforce, we look at providers, we look at financing long-term services and supports, we look at affordable housing, we look at transportation, we look at food injustice, we look at all of these things in silos when it is all interconnected. I'm going to break down some of those component parts for you in a minute, but first, I want to take a moment with you and envision a future for older Virginians together. What do you see? I see a population completely integrated into our communities. Services and supports that are affordable and accessible. A future when we honor the gifts of those who have come before us and ensure that not only are they supported, but are still asked to give of themselves because they have so much to offer. A future when we aren't siloing people because of their age, ability, income, religion, race, sexual orientation, or gender identity. Services and supports people need when they need them in the place that they call home. And in order to do that, we have to hear the voices of the older adults that we're speaking about. We have a pilot currently in Richmond, Virginia, that's funded by 5 of our providers that we call Dreaming Home. And we've held 11 listening sessions in the greater Richmond metro region. 150 older adults have come. And the question we have asked is, when you dream of home in your latest years, what do you see? What do you think of? 75% of our participants have been African American, and 65% of them have had an annual household income of between $45,000 and $55,000 a year. All of the participants are over the age of 55. It won't surprise you that what they hope for is what Elizabeth shared in the earlier slides, the greatest needs that we have. Positive aging for each Virginian is LeadingAge Virginia's vision for the future. We are a not-for-profit association governed by a board of directors representing 115 aging services providers around the Commonwealth that represent the full continuum of care. So adult day, assisted living, affordable housing, home health, home care, hospice, nursing home, continuing care, retirement communities, life plan communities, and I think I got them all. They serve older adults on their campuses and in the greater community. I hope you'll note, however, that our vision is not provider-centric, it is consumer-centric. Our members are indeed a catalyst, a platform through which we will expand the world of possibilities for aging, but the impact we seek is greater than us. We seek to impact aging no matter where individuals choose to live or what services they need to access. We recognize that to impact the way people age in the Commonwealth, we will require a wolf pack. One who is willing to not only seek to influence change at the policy level, but to demand that change. We have to remember that it is our privilege and our responsibility to advocate for the right public policies for the right reasons. And I appreciate that so many elected officials and their representatives are with us today, either in person or virtually, because lawmakers seek to do the right thing, but sometimes don't know exactly how those policies are impacting people in their day-to-day lives. So we must tell the story. Access to affordable, quality care and services so older adults can age with grace, dignity, and purpose. And this is why we need events like this one, opportunities to bring people together who care about impacting the way people age in Virginia. Through conversations and collaboration, we can identify the real issues and take collective action. So what are the real issues? You've heard some of them already this morning, but I'm going to start with the fundamentals, and I ask you to envision Maslow's hierarchy. Affordable housing. It's a right we all have, and yet the inventory is limited. And this is not specific just for older adults. This affects our workforce as well. For every affordable senior housing apartment that exists, there are at least 10 people on the waiting list. Affordable housing providers don't just provide a home, they provide service navigation. Many of them provide meals programs, healthy food, wellness programming. We've known for ages that housing is healthcare. We need to advocate for more affordable housing, not just for older adults, but also for intergenerational living. Just in the past few weeks, you might have heard that the Extended Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP benefits put in place during the pandemic ended for older adults. This means that older adults have reverted back to 2019 income, but are having to pay 2023 inflationary prices for the food that they need. Just as housing is healthcare, we must remember that food is medicine. We need to work together to not just address affordability, but to address access. Research has shown that people living in Black and brown neighborhoods have fewer grocery stores and more fast food. We have to ensure that all Virginians, no matter where they live, have access to healthy foods they can afford. And again, this will require new creative partnerships and expanded policy options. Over 16% of the Commonwealth, as you heard, is comprised of adults over the age of 65. And there are 2 amendments in Virginia's current budget that will significantly affect those who need care to age with dignity. The first is the auxiliary grant for assisted living. Currently, auxiliary grant funds some assisted living residents in the Commonwealth, but it is grossly underfunded. And so providers lose money or choose not to enter into this program because they can't afford the cost of care. The assisted living auxiliary grant has an increase that is in the budget, proposed budget, and we need advocacy to make sure that even though it won't cover the cost of care, that at least we will see the increase. I want to also connect you to the fact that our affordable housing providers, the people that live with them, if there is no auxiliary grant for them, or if there is not an affordable assisted living provider, which by the way, there are not affordable assisted living providers, there's very few, that means they have to go to a nursing home, which is a higher pay for the state and also not the right setting for them. We want to make sure that people are aging in the setting that is most appropriate for them. Another issue relying upon a finalized budget are adult day centers. Adult day centers keep people in community. They give caregivers respite, help support caregivers to be in the workforce. And yet we've seen closures since the pandemic because again, it is much less expensive than a nursing home, but the Medicaid reimbursement rate is not where it needs to be to cover these services. And so we need to make sure that we are advocating so that people can be in the settings most appropriate for them. My colleagues mentioned the sandwich generation, and indeed this is a rising demographic that accounts for about 47% of adults in their 40s and 50s who have a parent 65 or older, or are also raising children. I won't ask you to self-identify, but I'm sure there are many. I remember early in the pandemic, my husband and I both work in older adult services, so you can imagine the conversations around our house with a kid, and then my mom, and I was very concerned about my mom and having access to groceries. So I would order the groceries, and I delivered the groceries because she didn't know how to order them. And as I delivered the groceries, I saw a case of wine on the ground. It was wrapped. It had a Total Wine label on it. And I said, Grace, you can't order groceries? She said, wine's just one thing. It's the aisles, Melissa. It's the virtual aisles. Caregiving is hard enough, as we heard Rita. Rita, thank you for sharing your family story. It was a wonderful story to witness. I appreciate it really much. And we know that this is a challenge, as we've heard, that everybody faces. My mother still has not learned how to order groceries, just so you know. And there are people in our workforce, amazing people in our workforce who are leaving. We saw in the Great Resignation that one of the reasons people were leaving, mostly women, is because they were suddenly having to make choices. Courtney lives in my neighborhood. She has her master in fine arts. She has an incredible job that she loves, except her workplace is a little toxic. Her mother has cancer and she's got 2 elementary schoolers. Her last day of work will be June 30th because she has had to make the difficult choice for her family. She has had to say that she's going to put her passion for her work on the back burner so she can care for her mom, who is in hospice, and her children. We are losing good people in a variety of sectors. So we know we are in a workforce crisis, and half of the workforce in aging services was not born in the United States, and yet immigration policy is still unsettled. So we need to do something to create a pipeline for workers who are willing to do some of the most difficult jobs in this country. We need to, I love that you said value the invaluable, and that pertains to our front row workforce, which a friend of mine just said, it's not front line anymore, it's front row. And those are our certified nursing assistants. We need Virginia to prioritize supporting caregivers and recruiting a workforce ready, willing, and able to support a growing population. We need to educate our kids from a young age that working with older adults can be fun, enriching, and rewarding. But as I mentioned, we can't solve the workforce crisis without addressing affordable housing, without addressing transportation, without addressing childcare. We also must address the current inequities of our front row workforce. Many of our members are increasing wages, which is a really good thing. But the thing we have to remember that many of our workforce are on federal or state subsidies. And therefore, as we increase their hourly wage or as we try and develop them, they begin to lose those subsidies. Think Medicaid for their kids, think SNAP. And that means they have a deficit every month. So we're suddenly wondering why we ask people to work more hours and they say no. We're suddenly wondering why we ask a CNA if she'd like to be an LPN and she says no. And it's not because the desire is there, it's because there is a real economic impact called the benefits cliff on how they will be able to support their family. We're currently working with the Federal Reserve Banks of Atlanta and Virginia to identify the impact of benefits cliff on our front row workforce and aging services. More to come, but we want people to reach self-sufficiency. We want to promote and develop our rising stars. We have to take a person-centered approach, not just to the way we support our older adults, but to the way we support our staff. I wanted to mention the middle market. You know, the biggest part of the baby boom generation are those who don't qualify for a subsidy because they have too much, but they have too little to afford private pay. These are my parents. I mentioned Grace already. I'll bring Jerry into the story for a limited time because he doesn't deserve the spotlight. But Grace and Jerry, my father is a Vietnam vet. He's a retired DC police officer with a pension. My mom worked when I was growing up and I had no idea because she took me to school in the morning and she picked me up in the afternoon and she constantly baked cookies. She was always the room mother. But my two parents living off my father's pension from the police department. Thank God they've got health insurance for life. After 50 years of marriage, my parents got divorced and I got mom in the divorce. She now lives less than a mile from me. She supports me as much as I support her. But what is going to happen when she falls? She won't move. Doesn't matter what I do. Doesn't matter what I say. She'll listen to my husband a little bit, but she still hasn't moved. Second floor walk up. She's not carrying wine. We know somebody else is carrying that for her, but she does carry other things. She is one fall away. One fall away. And this terrifies me because how will we afford what she needs? And so we have a strong social, ethical imperative to solve this problem. I mentioned women's soccer. I got it. I'm not actually a soccer fan. I'm just a really big Abby Wambach fan. In 1999, the women's soccer team went to FIFA, the governing body of soccer, and said they wanted to start playing in stadiums like men did. And FIFA said, no, people are not going to come watch you play soccer. Boy, I bet whoever said that really regrets it. So the U.S. women's soccer team took a grassroots approach. They started showing up at soccer camps. They started showing up at youth soccer leagues. They started showing up at schools. They were united and committed to a vision they knew was possible and determined to bring to life. And we know that they created momentum to change that story. And in their effort, they surpassed men's soccer and many other male-dominated sports along the way. So tell me what the U.S. women's soccer team that the people in this room don't. Passion. You wouldn't be here if you weren't passionate about the subject of aging. Purpose. I believe we have collective purpose, collective mission. Determination. Yes. Leadership. We have that. We have people stepping up every day to lead this conversation. So what we need is advocacy. Advocacy is storytelling, and we can do it in the General Assembly. We can do it at Congress. We can do it in social media. We can do it in newspapers. We cannot wait for others to see this problem. We have to provide solutions to our problems and advocate on our own behalf. We have the power to change the trajectory of aging in Virginia, not just for my mom, but for all the people that you love. I guess for my dad too, but whatever. We have the passion, the purpose, the leadership, and what we need is the momentum. We can no longer be a light under a bushel. We must stand up and shine a light on who we are and what we do for all to see. We have the power to change people's preconceived notion of what aging and aging services is. Abby Wambach said in a recent commencement address, don't watch the news because it's all bad news. Be the news. Let's be the news coming out of today. Thank you, Drew. We're the news today, thanks to Drew. Aging is a human issue. Aging is an economic issue. Aging is a local, state, and national issue. We need collaboration and partnership between nonprofits, business, and government sectors to create solutions for these challenges. Solutions that are not just life-sustaining, but are life-enriching. I started my time with you explaining why we need an ecosystem approach to ensure positive aging for each Virginian. We need to recognize the diverse needs of older adults and their caregivers. And the only way we will know that, as I mentioned at the beginning, is to ask. I recently heard a story told by Gloria Steinem. She was in college in Connecticut. She had to take a science class, and so she took geology. She thought it'd be easy. She suddenly finds herself in the Connecticut River, and she looks up to the riverbank and sees a turtle. And so she walks gently up the turtle bank and thinks, I'm going to save this turtle. She realizes it's a snapping turtle. I don't know how she knew that. Maybe it snapped at her. So she slowly dragged the turtle down the bank, put it in the river. Her professor looked at her and said, are you happy? And she said, of course I'm happy. I just saved this turtle. He said, you know, it probably took that turtle 20 days to get up to that riverbank and nest. And she said, oh my God. And he said, next time, ask the turtle. Gloria Steinem said that that has informed every movement she's ever participated in. She does not go into movements assuming to know what the people who will be most affected need, want, or desire. We need to ask the turtle. I also, it sounds like I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm in the car a fair amount. I recently listened to a podcast where someone mentioned committing the cardinal sin of aging in America. The cardinal sin of aging in America. We cannot stand by any longer allowing people to feel they are burdening our communities, our families, our region, our state, or our country simply by growing older. We must demand those running for office and those in office to be able to answer the questions about how they are going to ensure positive aging for each Virginian. There are many competing interests, and this won't be easy. We are fighting for priority. We are fighting against ageism. We are fighting complacency. We are fighting for what we value most. But as written in the Jungle Book, and I mentioned the ecosystem, the strength of the wolf is the pack. The strength of the pack is the wolf. We can be the wolves. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Please join me in transforming the way people age in Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I love that the wolf inspired the deer to change its behavior. Yes. It's a very delicate way of describing that. Rita, we'll bring you back up on stage. Right now, we're gonna, the three of us, have a seat at the table, do what we're calling a fireside chat. I want to talk a little bit more about some action items coming out of some of the discussions that we just heard. And this is also the opportunity for you to use those cute note cards that you were handed. If you've got a question about something that you've heard so far, or maybe something that you've experienced in your own life or a loved one's life that you want to ask specifically, feel free to write it down on this card. We'll collect those and hand them up, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can. Okay, so I know you talked a little bit about policy, and we want to dive. I'm not tall enough for that. We want to dive a little bit more into that, and I know some of the policy that was discussed was at the national level. Maybe bringing it a little bit closer to home at the state level, at the local level. What are some things policy-wise that our lawmakers and voters can be thinking about and discussing with our lawmakers that could help?
You want to start, or? Well, I don't know what to do with this, so, okay. Is this thing on? The first, I think, is we have to recognize that the system in its current state is broken. And it's not actually a system. You know, we don't have a cohesive way to finance long-term services and supports for all Virginians as they age. Not everybody lives in a place where they have access. You shouldn't have to drive 30 miles to find a quality nursing home for your family. So I think the first thing is to ask the questions. We have to get to the heart, ask the right questions. And then I recently went to an event with an elected official who's at the federal level, and I asked her, you know, what are you talking about in the halls of Congress as it relates to aging? And I like this person a lot. And she just looked at me and she said, "You've stumped me, we're not." We have to tell the story. We have to raise the level of advocacy. And then we need to build coalitions to take a look at each of these parts that contribute to the ecosystem and be aware that it's hard work, but be willing to roll up our sleeves to do the hard work because it's the right work and it's what we should be focused on.
Yeah, Rita, what do those policies, I guess, kind of look like? Like, does it need a funding mechanism and actionable?
Exactly. And I think that, you know, to Melissa's point, it really is some intentional policy making. It's really understanding who these individuals are that you're trying to serve and what their needs are. Very specifically, I talked a little bit about it during my presentation, is we look at things like paid family leave, you know, so, and it's, you know, sometimes it's not the easiest conversation to have, but when we're looking at supporting a workforce, a very silent workforce, what are the specific policies that are needed to allow those individuals to do the things that they're doing and ultimately save the system money. Because if you don't have caregivers, if you don't have individuals being able to provide care in community, then those individuals do need to rely on public supports to be able to do things. And the money just isn't there funding those public supports. So then what happens? We look at things like many states are actually now looking at caregiver tax credits. So we know that caregivers are paying out of pocket, as I mentioned. How do we, again, help facilitate the support that these individuals need? They're not raising their hands asking for help, they're just doing it. So are there different levers that we can pull that make this role easier for individuals and ultimately help the entire system?
I think that's interesting too, because on the tax credit front, now you give a potential caregiver the option, right? And now they have choices that they could make that might be best serving their family member. Instead of having to do this because of financial reasons or whatever, now I can make a choice. What about on the private sector? What can the private sector be doing? You talked about paid family leave. Of course, there's some, at certain levels, that's public policy, and then on some levels, it could be private. What are some other options for our businesses?
I think, and I really appreciate that question, because so often we do just think it's kind of a legislative policy that will make all of the change. I really like to say it's public and private working together. There's so many, I'll speak from caregiving specifically, there are so many things that employers can do to better support their working caregivers. And again, it's actually recognizing that you have working caregivers, that you have employees who are caregivers, and being able to provide benefits to them and say, look, I know that you're working. Here's some flexibility in your day. Here is an opportunity to job share. Here is backup care that we can provide to you so that when you need to take someone to the doctor, when you need to take a day off, or you have to be at work, there's some backup care that is here for you. There are so many options, but it really requires, again, this intentional effort to recognize what the need is and work together to establish some of those changes and supports.
And it doesn't sound like a lot of those ideas require more money from the business, and we know schedule can be difficult. There's times that things need to happen. Melissa, expand on that a little bit. Maybe outside of scheduling and time flexibility, are there some other options that could benefit a caregiver, in terms of what they're asking for from their employer?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is also just education and resources, making sure that our workforce understands that there are organizations that can support them in these conversations and as they're looking for services or resources for their family member. I think, caregiving is isolating. And I think I appreciate Elizabeth's pop quiz because until you read those questions, you often don't think of yourself as a caregiver. It's not like people say, I identify as a caregiver. That's not the norm. And so I think making sure that these conversations are happening and that we're understanding that this is affecting real people and exploring ways to support them. And then you're going to retain them. Right? Again, this is an economic issue. So when we look at the workforce crisis that we're in, the ability to retain people because you're supporting them through this time in life, that's a really easy way to do that.
Absolutely. What about me? What about us? What can we do? What can, other than, sitting at a conference and taking in this data, which is incredibly helpful, what can we do actionable, taking home with us, taking to our workplace, that can be a catalyst to start helping?
Well, Drew, the next time you moderate any type of debate, I want aging to be a question that you ask. I mean, that is a real life example of something that you can do. So, I mean, they're applauding you.
Is it me? I think it's you.
No, I'm the problem. It's me. But really, I mean, that's when I took this role 7 years ago at LeadingAge Virginia. I mean, my vision would be that this would be a platform on which people would be running for office because they understood the growing need of older adults and their families in Virginia. And we're not there. There are pieces of it there, but there is nobody who has been willing to say or who has the knowledge to know We have got to fix this. There are so many elements, and it's big. But I think just being able to reach out to your local, your state, and your national legislators, they want you to visit them, or they want you to invite them to your businesses, right? And to be able to tell the story of what the challenges are that you and your family or anybody in your community is feeling about aging. The only way we're going to get attention from policymakers is for them to know it's a problem. And the thing I love about Virginia, which is also a real challenge at the state level, we get 3,000 pieces of legislation introduced and every General Assembly. It could be one person told their elected official, this is a problem for my family, and darn it, they will craft legislation around that one person's story. We can have an impact. So just imagine all the voices singing the same song.
Yeah, I mean, is it, Rita, is it just a place of naivety, of ignorance, of not realizing that this is something that needs to be addressed until, oh, wow, I'm there. Oh, wow, my mom is in a situation, and now I'm acknowledging it?
I think it's deeper than that. I think people are scared, right? When they think about aging, they don't always think about it in a positive light. They think about aging as, oh, all of these horrible things are going to happen. And the longer I can push off this conversation, the better it'll be. But in reality, it's the opposite, right? We have to start having these conversations earlier. We have to start planning earlier so that as things happen as you age, and as you may roll into a caregiving situation, you are prepared to have these conversations. You are prepared financially, hopefully, to be able to take better care of that individual and you yourself as the caregiver. I think so often, and it goes to this storytelling, we have to normalize this act of aging. We have to normalize this act of family caregiving, and we have to talk about it wherever we are. We have to talk about it in our faith communities. We have to talk about it in our homes. I talk about it at our home and school association meetings. I have parents all the time coming up to me saying, oh, I'm starting to care for them. I'm starting to see this. And the more that we can normalize this and make it just an everyday conversation, but really get real with the struggles that we're facing and that we're trying to balance so many things and we have little to no assistance, that's when the change begins to happen.
Very good. Excellent. Did we get a couple of questions on the cards? There we go. We'll answer a few of these and then we're going to take a real short break. The coffee should hopefully...
No, we're going to tell them there's no coffee so Rita and I can get out the doors and then you can announce there's coffee.
Oh, there isn't any coffee. Thank you. All right, caller, you're on the line. Our first question here, how can we promote the development of villages that help fill the gap of missing family supports? 16 VA villages delivered more than $1 million, $1 million value of services in 2022. How can we promote the development of villages that help fill the gap of missing family supports?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't mention in our Dreaming Home pilot in Richmond, we not only did demographic research, we looked at the services that exist by locality, and really the fact that you look at one county in the greater Richmond metro region and it's very different from the other county. But we then just had a conversation around villages and the incredible service they fill, particularly in Northern Virginia. And so I have a feeling I know who asked this question. We've got to get it to the attention of state regulators, state agencies to understand that this can fill a gap. We need to focus on innovative solutions that are community-based, that are outside of provider settings. And so I think the more that we can shine a spotlight on how effective the villages have been to the communities in which they're working, and there's so many different models, but I think it's really important. We talk about NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities, are often in urban settings. Villages have taken this to a whole new level with coordinating services, helping people with home modifications, transportation, all of these things. So I think, again, let's get some media attention on these villages. Drew?
You got it. As
Drew's
the media, I
lose my
endorse
number.
it.
He is going to lose my number.
All right, our next question asks, what do hospitals need to prioritize as it relates to inpatient and outpatient care, and how can we help with that?
I think a huge thing that hospitals need to prioritize is recognizing, especially as it relates to older adults, that more often than not, there is a family caregiver, there's a family member or friend that is helping them, that they're not just transitioning home into the abyss, and that it's very important that we support those family caregivers. And a lot of that comes with engaging with them in the hospital. We always say family caregivers are invisible until the day of discharge, and then you're the most popular person in the room. And you get this stack of papers, you get home, and you have this immense, stressful, overwhelming role of caring for somebody, and you don't feel prepared. And so in Virginia, as I stated earlier, there is a law. It's the CARE Act. And it's very critical that health systems use that CARE Act to be able to better support family members and friends and recognize them. It helps you too, right? I think it's always so interesting that I don't like the question that we often get, what is the return on investment for me as the healthcare system? But if you must ask that, it's really important to ensure that these individuals that are being transitioned home don't come back. You don't want them back, they don't want to be back. And so what can you do to ensure that that caregiver is supported? And oftentimes it happens inpatient, but it's also building relationships with community organizations, like many of you represented here, to make sure that as that person transitions home and that family caregiver then needs to provide supports in community, that they know what is even available to them. So it really is about building relationships.
Very important question here. How do we address the needs of our aging immigrant community, a workforce that has little to no savings for aging and also housing?
I can start. I mean, one thing that I will start, and I'm glad this question came because I really wanted to address it more broadly, is that, again, we tend to think of one type of community whenever we think of offering supports. We have got to recognize the diversity, the racial and ethnic diversity, the cultural diversity that is across this country, including in Virginia, and that each of those communities experiences care in a different way. They have different financial needs, they're at different socioeconomic levels, and we have to begin to understand what is going on in those communities so that we can provide better supports. The more that we kind of put our head into the sand and not really recognize what those challenges are and work within those communities, working with trusted leaders and stakeholders in those communities to bring about change, the situation is only going to get worse and individuals are not going to be supported.
And I would imagine that you kind of touched on this, that the needs of those individuals, culturally, religiously, or otherwise, are different and unique. Mm-hmm. How can, back to some of those other questions, is there a way to, I guess, kind of bolster the services in response to that, and to making sure that, people of a different background are receiving care that is sensitive and helpful to them based on where they're from and who they are?
Well, we can know the turtle, right?
Right.
We can stop
We tried.
walking into communities and telling them what they need. We have to start talking to community members. We have to start recognizing who they are. We don't know anything about a community until we talk to that community. We can make a lot of assumptions, and oftentimes those assumptions are negative. So until we start engaging with individuals, until we start listening to what their needs are, at that point, we can begin to not just develop situations, but co-create solutions with them. Again, even once we engage with them, it's not, oh, thank you, let me go fix this and bring it back to you. We have to build sustainable solutions in community by working with community members, and then that's how it works out, because then it replicates, right?
And that's why we need to cultivate leadership from people of diverse backgrounds, races, ethnicities, et cetera. We need more representational leadership, because I'll tell you, one of the challenges we found, really excited to have all kinds of listening sessions with Asian Americans and with Indian Americans and Hispanic Americans. but we couldn't get to them because that's not their culture to come and voice their opinion, right? And so we're doing some new work with some community partners to understand what do we need to set up for them to feel comfortable sharing with us? Who are the right people to be in the room? And the last thing I'll add is we could learn a lot from the way elders are valued in all their cultures and have that inform a lot of what we do in this country.
Our next question asks, why do many older adults, around 48%, prefer not to retire in Fairfax County even when they enjoyed living/working here?
I'm going to assume it's cost of living, or they want to go to the beach. I don't feel equipped. Does anybody else have that answer out in the audience? Anybody retiring currently, moving out of Fairfax County? Transportation issues? What was the other one? What did you say? Transportation. Yep. Accessible, affordable housing. Their kids have moved
Kids have
away.
already moved away, yeah.
Yeah, we try and get away. We get followed.
Just follow them.
That's right. That's what they're doing. They're
Yeah,
they're
just-
following their kids.
Just go right there.
Did you say it's payback?
And if there are any Fairfax County supervisors in the room, if we could work on getting one of those beaches installed. 48%, maybe we get it down to 45,
Yeah.
44. I think we've got time for maybe one more question here. Asking, you briefly mentioned transportation. With jurisdictions in Nova planning to build affordable housing in rural areas, how can we provide transit and pedestrian safety for sprawling areas?
You know, there's a lot of work being done. I have a very good colleague in the AARP Public Policy Institute, Jana Lanat, that does a lot of work in the transportation space. It's not my specialty at all, but channeling my inner Jana. I think that there's an opportunity to look at how it's being done in other parts of the country. I think so often we try to recreate the wheel when we can look at other examples of how this is working out. So while I can't speak specifically, I know that she's done a lot of work in this space, and there's some published work to really recognize the challenges, especially when dealing with rural communities around transportation. A lot of that is volunteer driven, and there's also shared transportation through employers, health systems, and others that are some opportunities and options as well.
Is the older community in Northern Virginia, how are they getting around? Is it mostly by a car, being driven by car from a family member? What is that mode of transportation?
That's a great question. I'm not a Northern Virginia expert. Sorry, I'm a Marylander. Don't tell anybody that.
Why are we talking to this one about transportation?
Right.
Because we have so many of the same issues, but I would suspect it's very similar to that of other more urban areas. I think that there hopefully is a sound public transportation system, but from what I'm hearing, there are some limitations to that. Especially via access. I know that was a limitation for my mother. There was public transportation, but she had to walk a half a mile to get to that public transportation. And so what are we doing to better bolster access programs, again, shared transportation services, and the use of Lyft and Uber and other services that can be funded through waivers and other things. So I do see that happening in other states.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. This has been fantastic. Yes.
Thank you.
Check. Hey, there we are. All right, folks. Let's make our way back to our seats. We're going to get started with our panel discussion here in just a couple minutes. We're going to go ahead and get moving, and they can filter in, but we're going to get started with our panel discussion here. So to begin our panel discussion, I want you to welcome Catherine Schott-Murray. She is the chair of the board of the Community Foundation and a shareholder at Odin, Feldman, and Pittleman with a focus on trust and estate planning, as well as elder law and special needs planning. She is an active member of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys and has served on the board of directors at the Virginia chapter of the NAELA, including as its president. Please welcome Catherine.
Thanks, Drew. Good morning again, everyone, and good morning online. I'd like to welcome everyone again to our discussion about aging in Northern Virginia. It is my pleasure to moderate this panel of experts to talk about what is happening here in Northern Virginia, what aging looks like, and what the future could look like for aging. So I'd like to introduce each of my colleagues here on the stage before we begin, and you can reference their bios in the program. First, we have Dolores Athey-Clearfield. She is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Continuum of Care with Capital City Nurses. She is dedicated to helping ensure the least restrictive environments and the most cost-effective solutions for clients through the Continuum of Care program for Capital City Nurses. Next is Steve Gurney. He founded Retirement Living Sourcebook in 1990, a comprehensive publication for aging in the regions of DC, Maryland, and Philadelphia. Steve has provided guidance to numerous organizations to help them better serve the senior population. In addition, Steve founded Pro Aging Network and leads the DC Senior Resource Group for senior serving professionals. Next, we have Sarah Henry, who is the director of the Prince William Area Agency on Aging, serving Prince William County and the cities of Manassas and Manassas Park. Sarah has worked 17 years for Prince William County in multiple roles within the Agency of Aging before becoming the director in 2015. Prior to that, she worked at the Manassas Park Department of Parks and Recreation. We have Helen King, who is the director of the Arlington Area Agency on Aging. She joined Arlington County's Department of Human Services, Aging and Disability Services Division in 2016, first serving as the Volunteer Guardianship Program Specialist, then as Management Analyst with the Agency on Aging. Prior to joining Arlington County, she worked as a case manager for a service provider serving older adults in the District of Columbia. And finally, we have Heather Surrey, who is a registered nurse and certified care manager with 25 years of community nursing experience. In 2017, she founded Pathways in Aging and now leads a team of care managers serving clients throughout Northern Virginia and the greater Seattle area and Washington State. Heather is the Mid-Atlantic chapter president of the Aging Life Care Association, a role she has filled since 2021. I once again invite all of you to submit your questions to our panel for our Q&A later. And those online, please submit them through Zoom. So we've heard a lot today about the system, and we've talked about ecosystems and potentially changing those ecosystems, and we've heard from a more national level, we've heard at the state level, but now we're going to talk a little bit more locally and more hyper-locally. So let's talk about the system that is currently in place. So Helen and Sarah, first, if you could describe the Northern Virginia Aging Network and the role of the area agencies on aging.
Sure. Good morning. Thank you. The Northern Virginia Aging Network, sometimes called NVAN, is a group of the Northern Virginia area agencies on aging, their staff, as well as their Commission on Aging, which is our advisory boards that help us understand what's going on in the community and advise us on services. Come together every other month, and we talk about aging issues in the Northern Virginia region. Not only members of the Area Agency on Aging commissions and staff are able to participate, but community members who have an interest in aging, as well as providers in the community, join us. The NVAN typically has a legislative platform that they move forward to the General Assembly each year, and have had great success over the years with different initiatives they have brought forward. So NVAN is a group that meets on a regular basis to talk about aging issues in Northern Virginia.
And Sarah mentioned the area agencies on aging. We are in every community, not only in Virginia, in Northern Virginia, but across the country. So area agencies on aging are all about helping people to age in place safely. We serve adults who are 60 and older, and we're providing programs. You've probably heard of Meals on Wheels or the transportation programs that we talk about, in-home services, and also other key programs like legal services to help especially individuals who are lower income or maybe with limited English proficiency to be able to safely age in their homes that they choose. We are unique to our communities. There are no two AAAs across, we call agencies on aging AAAs, sorry. There are no two AAAs that look alike across the country. We have core services that we are regulated to provide, but we can have flexibility to provide them in a way that makes sense to our community. And so we, Melissa talked about talking to the turtle. We do have an obligation to at least once a year talk to our community. In Arlington, we just had our session on Monday, and we're asking them questions about what matters most to them and what services and needs do they have so that we can make sure that we're tailoring our programs specifically to their needs.
Thank you. Heather, what is a life care manager? And could you please describe for us what the Aging Life Care Association is and does?
Absolutely. The aging life care profession is a distinct profession that a lot of people don't know about, even in the healthcare space. So we are health and human services professionals from a variety of different backgrounds. And the thing that we have in common is that we are all experts on aging. There's about 2,000 of us nationally. We are kind of under the umbrella of a national professional association called the Aging Life Care Association, and aginglifecare.org is our website, where there is a zip code search feature, so you can find someone who does what I do anywhere in the country. We largely serve people privately. Medicare does not pay for what we do. There are some organizations out there with grant funding and other programs where people can access our services. And I think because of the level of expertise that we have, we do a lot in the community. We offer a lot of education. We try to find ways to reach people the best that we can, even those who might not be able to hire us privately.
Wonderful. Dolores, what is Capital Caring Nurses, and how does your work support our aging adults in the community?
Capital City Nurses is a home care company providing private duty in-home care. And in-home basically means wherever someone is currently residing. They can be within a congregate setting, an independent assisted living or memory care. They could be temporarily housed in a rehabilitation center. They can be in the hospital. Really, it is providing services to meet the ADL needs of that patient wherever home is at the current moment. We also provide private duty skilled nursing for those that have maximized out their Medicare benefits and are not able to self-manage, or in Medicare terms, rates them as a failure to thrive, so they're not continuing to get better. We do have nurses to go in and supplement that need for families that are not able to do it on their own. We provide community-based education. We have a very robust continuum of care program, and we've been serving older adults throughout Virginia, Maryland, DC, and Delaware for over 30 years now. We work with families on a private pay basis, long-term care insurance. We work with veteran benefits, county-based grants through the Area Agency on Aging, and also with Medicaid recipients in the state of Virginia.
Thank you. And Steve, tell us about your personal journey in the area of aging, as well as the technologies that exist to support our current aging system.
Okay, well, back when I was in college, my grandfather needed a nursing home, and I witnessed firsthand the challenges that my family had to go through back then in making a selection like that. And when I graduated, I didn't have the greatest job in the world, and so I figured, and I reflected on what my family had to go through. So I put together a guide. You can pick up a copy here that lists all these different places, because that didn't exist back in the 90s. And I didn't expect I just wanted something on my resume to get a better job. And here I am 33 years later. So, but I couldn't have stumbled into a more wonderful profession. Now, technology is one of the things that they wanted me to talk about today. And we've had a few little quizzes here this morning, but by show of hands, does anybody know anybody who is sort of challenged by technology? They might be intimidated by one of these, okay? So, and some of you may be, in the audience may be intimidated, which I understand. Now, one of the things, when you're reflecting on those people that you raised your hands about, they might be older than you, okay? But I want you to just really think, not only in technology, but all aspects, is the fact that they are hesitant to use technology has nothing to do with their age, okay? Those of us who aren't that intimidated by this, we're just more used to it, okay? And what I would say to all of us is, good technology is technology that you don't even know is working behind the scenes for you. Now, I promise I'm going to shut up here, but I'm going to give you, there's literally thousands of apps being created to help make people more productive as caregivers and this, that, and the other. But I love sharing a great piece of technology, and that's GoGo Grandparents, because getting an Uber and Lyft ride is not easy, okay? You can't talk to anybody. And if you're waiting for your Uber and Lyft car, you have nobody to call, and you got to click around and install a million other apps. GoGo Grandparents is technology that enables somebody to pick up the phone and say, I'd like a ride to my doctor's appointment. They'll ask you if you'd like the driver to wait around and this, that, and the other. They've screened drivers who are appropriate for this type of drive. And you'll even get a notification that they'll call you and say your car's going to be here in 15 minutes. And then after that drive goes on, they'll call you the next day and see how it went, see how the driver was, so that they can help other folks. And so that's, not an app. It's actually anti-app. It's using the old-fashioned rotary dial phone if you want to use it.
Does anyone have a rotary dial phone anymore? Is it hardwired? There you go. So Steve, you also have had some personal experience in living in an assisted living facility. You did some firsthand research.
Well, okay. Well, I feel like I'm monopolizing the mic, so I'm going to be real brief with this. So right now I'm 57 years old. When I was 43, I moved in and lived in 5 different senior living communities as a resident temporarily. And one of the reasons that I did that was people were regarding me as this expert in senior living. And I reflected on it as though it's kind of like working in a restaurant, but not eating the food in that restaurant. I had never spent the night in a senior community. And it started with one of the communities that are listed in Sourcebook that said, yeah, we can do that. And it was one of the most wonderful experiences that I did. Now, there's people that have sort of, gone undercover or used a wheelchair, and they don't really use a wheelchair, and done these immersive experience. I wanted to experience quote unquote senior living community as a healthy individual. I wanted to sort of put this community to the test to say, these communities to the test to say, can these be homes to people, not older people or people with disabilities? And I have to say, they are the best neighborhoods I've ever lived in, okay? Because the blind spot in 20 years in my career is that I didn't realize how much the residents cared for each other. We talk about the training of the staff and things of that nature, but the camaraderie of the residents and the close proximity to your neighbors really makes a huge difference, okay? Especially if you're a car-dependent suburban dweller like me. And so I'd always feel lonely when I would come home, even though I came home to my family, when I'd come home, little projects. But I learned a lot of stuff, and I think it helped me speak more authentically to older adults, families, and providers on the transition that individuals have to make. And anyways.
I think that's a good segue into the challenges in the system that we see. And so I throw this out to the panel at large about what are the difficulties that older adults and families have in navigating the existing system with the services and the resources that are available?
Okay. That's a great question, and it's something that we face every day at the Area Agency on Aging. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, I wish we knew you existed when my mom was having trouble, or I didn't know you existed, this is great. So I think it's just understanding that these services are available in your community. I think that any resource that people are able to reach out to is wonderful. But what if it's not the right one? So if they call somewhere and say, you know, I'm looking for Meals on Wheels, and all we respond is, well, we don't provide that, and you hang up. But we don't share with them where they can receive that service. So really looking at how people access the services, but ensuring that no matter which agency or company that they come to, they're going to get what they need. Because there's nothing more frustrating than calling 10 places and no one's able to help you. Then a lot of times we see people just give up and they say, forget it. But they're really going without what they need to stay in the community safely. So I think being able to access the services, regardless of where you start, is very important.
I would agree that that's one of the greater challenges, that services for older adults are extremely fragmented. It's very difficult to pull those pieces together. And in our role as aging life care managers, that team building piece is a big part of what we do, to weave together those options in the community, whether they're private options, whether they're public options. Caregivers are overwhelmed, they're exhausted, they are in the workforce, they are raising children, they are undergoing just the immense stress, emotional, physical stress, not getting enough rest, neglecting their own health care, neglecting their nutrition, all of just in their role as a caregiver. So I think knowing where to go to find the pieces of those puzzles is critical. And affordability is another huge problem, because you might need all of these things. The entitlement programs don't provide many of them, the things that people need.
Yeah, and kind of playing on that funding and affordability, right? We've heard, and we all know, that the population of older adults is getting larger, but our budgets have in its essence remained flat, right? So we're actually running at a deficit. So having that funding, advocating, we need you all to advocate for us for additional funding, to increase the funding to Older Americans Act programs or other organizations, so that we can continue to serve the older adults who so desperately need our services.
And I would say, in the effort of proactivity, we need to educate people on how to have clear, concise, transparent conversations, right? A lot of the times when these services are needed, the difficulty in accessing them is because we're undereducated, because we haven't searched for them, because we're afraid of our own mortality, or because we have an adult parent who doesn't want to lose their control of their own situation, so they don't share what's truly going on. So engaging them to not only search for the information, but to have a safe environment to be able to share and have transparent conversations around what good looks like for them is incredibly important for every family.
Well, it truly is a team approach, and that's why we have this panel here, is to show and to showcase the team that's required. We've talked a lot about housing and affordability of housing and the challenges there. What are you seeing in the community as options, particularly for those who are the solo agers? Elizabeth mentioned it earlier, and there are more and more who want to stay at home. I would say in my practice, I saw that more certainly as a result of COVID. People don't want to go into assisted living and then be locked away from their family. People, Rita explained being snuck into the skilled nursing facility to be with her mom as she passed away. So what are the options from a housing perspective?
Well, you brought up solo aging, which is one of my hot buttons, because we do these weekly discussions on every topic under the sun related to aging, and solo aging is the #1 topic. And the other stat, there were some great stats in that report on Northern Virginians who are living alone and or intentionally don't want their family to be involved in their care. And so one of the key ingredients to whether you're moving somewhere or living at home or using paid provider is intentionally looking at your network. And none of us do this, okay? We cultivate friends and family over the years, but we never write down on a sheet of paper, who they are and what connection they have to us, and then actually reach out to our network in advance and say, my kids are all over the country. If I land myself in the hospital, I'd like you to be the person that I could call. Are you up for that? And I'll do it for you. A lot of times it catches us all by surprise. And so one thing to get out there and do personally is take an inventory of your network and think about this and have conversations with your network, but then also coach others to help do this. And solo agers, the people that are defined as solo agers now, they are doing this, but I'm married and I've got kids, but my wife and I are not going to pass away on the same day. One of us is going to be a solo ager. We need to have that conversation. I know I'm babbling. I'm really good at that. I had a point to this, but I'm going to put this mic down and let the rest of the panel.
And I think to that point, we talk about solo aging. I always say the term, it's not relevant till it's relevant. So what are we doing to proactively think about our situations that we may be in? The example I always use is that the area agencies on aging do Medicare counseling, unbiased Medicare counseling. We may go out to a community and talk to the same people 4 years in a row, but not until they're 64 is it relevant, and they're going to pay attention that there's Medicare counseling at the area agency on aging. So understanding that we can share, we can go out into the community, we can tell people what we're doing and what services we have to offer them, but if it's not relevant, they may not retain it. Okay,
I remember what I was going to say, and it's on affordability. Okay, the secret to you saw it, 6 billion in unpaid caregivers. I hope that number is 12 billion, 15 billion, because what that means, I want those people to be compensated. I want programs that are going to pay for unpaid caregivers. But for those of us that don't have the savings and the pension and enough in Social Security coming in, the only way that we're going to be able to survive is by cultivating a network of unpaid and paid and volunteer providers like the people from Shepherd Center and the villages to support our care. But the beauty of that is we want this to happen. Let's take care of our elders, because someday it might be us, and that was my point. It's the network can provide affordability and a solution if you find somebody in a solo aging situation.
Well, and just to tag on to what Steve was saying, let's say we could all afford the care. There simply are not enough people out there to give us that individual care. So we need to think creatively about how we're going to use the resources we have and build that culture of community so that we can better take care of each other. You know, there are skilled aspects to caregiving that require learning specific skills, but a lot of caregiving, we've talked about this around working with people with dementia, a lot of it is communication. Those are things that can be learned. Those are things that people like us, aging life care managers, can teach communities how to do. So that's something that I know we all have a vision to see people take a greater interest in how to build that skill set to better care for our neighbors.
Well, and I think it's important to realize too, everything has a ripple effect. So it was a drop in the bucket to raise the standard minimum wage, Virginia, Maryland, DC. When we do that, like she said, there are people that are basically falling off the cusp of benefits that allow them to be able to have a sustainable option for work. When that happens, it increases the cost of care for the older adults, which increases all of the numbers that we saw today because care becomes more expensive, right? So the ripple effect of what we do from a legislative standpoint has to start addressing the entire continuum, from the family member to the caregiver to the care recipient themselves, to everything, including Medicare and Medicaid coverages, because a lot of the mindset is that Medicare is going to cover me. And Medicare will not cover any type of congregate living. And if you're going to a nursing home, Medicare will cover a short rehabilitation stay, but you will be on your own or full-time, total care for Medicaid for long-term care placement in a skilled nursing facility, which is not going to have the bells, the whistles, the engagement, everything that everyone is drawn to with every commercial you see for senior living. Senior living is fantastic for those of us that can afford it, but for those of us that can't, our options for affordable housing is either shared, cohabitating with our children, getting on a wait list, praying that an auxiliary grant bed becomes available, going to a wait list for a sliding scale income apartment, right? Or long-term care Medicaid and a skilled nursing bed. Those are scary options.
So how do we educate our older adults in the community? How do we find them? Because we're talking about building a network, building a community, but they have to know to do that. And if they don't have family that's near or don't want to have the conversations, which is a lot of the time, it's not going to happen to me, that happens to other folks. How do we reach them?
Okay, well, I don't know if I'm going to have the answer to this question, but I'm going to tell you the problem, okay? Because I've been dealing with this, and everybody up here has been dealing with this for years. And the problem is ageism, okay? So I got this wonderful guide with thousands of resources in it, but do you know the phrase that I hear that I hear every single day of the week? Oh, that's great, I'm not ready for that yet. And why do people say that I'm not ready for that? Is because there's this umbrella of that's for other people and that's age specific. I loved my time in the senior living communities that I lived in, but those are the only legally segregated form of housing that you can have anymore. You can create housing that doesn't allow young people to live there. And we wonder why older adults are resistant to move into these communities. And this is kind of a joke here, but it's for real. It's, you know, I'll regularly talk to an adult daughter who's touring mom, and she's like, Mom doesn't want to go in. And I said, well, what does Mom say? And she goes, well, that's for old people. And I told her, I said, Mom, you're old. And Mom knows she's old. She just wants to live with all ages, all races, black, white, divorced, single, like on the street that she lives on with the trick-or-treaters, okay? So one of the things that we've got to do to get the word out is we've got to get more creative And we've got to, we as marketers also and promoters need to eliminate the ageist language that's in our communication. And that's not easy, because it's sort of like we got to tell people that this is going to help them, but we got to do it and not address the age segregated topic.
Well, there seems to be this demand for multi-generational type living or housing, but what are some of the barriers that exist to have that come to fruition?
I think it's a huge cultural shift for Americans. I think that part of our culture is this idea of being independent, and that a lot of older adults that we're seeing don't want to live with their children. They don't want their children to be in caregiving roles just as a preference. So, you know, from having been a nurse all of this time and working in the community all of this time, and working with a largely immigrant workforce in terms of home health aides and certified nursing assistants, I think that there's a lot that we can learn about how other cultures manage aging. And it's part of family life. It's part of societal life. So back to kind of what Steve was saying, this is not something we're going to be able to fix by tomorrow, but I do think that more intergenerational programming, you know, I think that employers need to better support adult children caregivers in being able to fulfill their roles there. But I do think that it's something that has to be, is not going to be entirely achieved with legislation. I think it is a cultural shift that we're going to have to make pretty quickly, because we're coming into a time of crisis.
Dolores, did you?
I was going to say, I think it's also, it's collaboration, right? And it's meeting people where they are. We are, a couple people have said that our system is broken and it's very fragmented, and it is. We have a ton of resources that are very pocketed. They have their specialty. We have some coalitions and transitions teams. We have some discharge. We have some population health initiatives. Everybody's running at the same goal, but everybody's running in different directions. Right? So collectively, how do we come together? How do we educate each other amongst these organizations to be able to utilize the partnerships that we have, and not only the people, right? Our cultural differences, to be able to take that back to your culture, because a lot of the education that I do within the community, I'm asked to come and speak in different arenas, but they say, oh, do you have anyone that's a Spanish speaker? Do you have anyone that can relate directly to an Asian population? And that's where they want you to meet them where they are. They want to talk to like-minded individuals that have walked their walk, understand their cultural values, and then we can start educating. But we've got to somehow not only stop the ageism, but stop the segregation amongst the groups that need our services.
Yeah. Another thought on this topic too is everybody in this room can really make things better if you start to have conversations with your loved ones in advance. What most caregivers will tell you, and most of the folks up on the stage, we deal with crisis situations, and mom never had a conversation about what she wanted, because this was never going to happen to her. And then we also don't know where the legal, the financial, all the documents, and that's where our jobs get turned upside down. And the best way that we can change this is by, you know, having conversations with your family or your best friend right now about these topics. And the beauty of having them right now is they don't have to happen in an 8-hour period. They could happen over an 8-year period. But if we begin having that, I think we're going to see a change in culture. I'm already seeing it, because so many people have gone through horrific caregiving situations. When they come out, they usually join our profession because they want to make a change, but they also say, the gift I'm going to give to my kids is I'm not going to have them go through this. And so it'll happen slowly, but if we all have dialogues, it'll improve.
Well, along those lines, what are some of the resources that are available from a preventative side, from a proactive side, that you see in all of your day-to-day that would help reduce the need for long-term care, that would keep people healthier longer? Because I think that's the goal for a lot of folks, and why they don't want to focus on the planning or being proactive.
Proactivity is one of my favorite words, right? But being able to be proactive also comes with one of my favorite phrases, head and heart alignment. People have to buy in. They have to have that head and heart alignment to run towards a goal that's going to make things easier. Utilizing the healthcare system for a proactive versus a reactive status can help. There are Medicare benefits that are completely underutilized all the time. Home health, coming in to work on swallows, nutrition, skilled nursing, ambulation, to get around the house, to put preventative equipment in place to prevent an injury. Any new diagnosis you are eligible for palliative care for a chronic disease. Palliative care is a service Medicare provides that comes in and deals with education around that disease process, symptom management, quarterbacking all of the specialists, and then any exacerbation that keeps someone out of a hospital. Hospice services. Everyone is terrified of the word hospice. It's almost as, what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost as taboo, thank you, as having the conversation around what do I want for end of life? What does my aging plan look like, right? So hospice services come in and they provide all of the support around services. And what we found is a lot of the families that go on to hospice end up being discharged because they're now getting medication and care and proper nutrition and hydration. And then all of a sudden, they're better. Right? So we can downgrade back to a palliative, but underutilization of the services that we have to keep us going, as well as the advanced care planning, the mindset that everything to deal with aging has to cost money. 5 Wishes is an advanced directive that is free, right? Post orders in the state of Virginia, physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment are done through a physician. They are free. They are end-of-life care planning. There are file of life, so we can get from any fire department to put on the refrigerator with our comorbidities, our medication list, and most importantly, our emergency contact information, because we all have these conversations, and you can tell someone what you want. But what happens when 911 shows up and you can't? Right? Advanced care planning documentation can be done without expense for families that have hindrances or barriers to the finances to go to an elder law attorney.
And I'm going to use this opportunity to make a plug for the agencies on aging. It's why we exist, right? And so find your agency on aging. They may not be called an agency on aging. I know where my mom lives, it's called the Office on Aging. They've got various other names, but find your local agency on aging and reach out to them. We have a wealth of services. We love it when family members call and say, you know, what do I need to know about X, Y, or Z, right? To start that education process early, to start those conversations early, that just puts you 10 steps ahead.
Yeah, and I agree. I also think that we need to continue focusing on what keeps older adults active in the community. Are there volunteer opportunities? Are there places for them to go and recreate and socialize? Are there places like at our senior centers, you can come have a noontime meal at lunch, and that's funded through our Older Americans Act dollars. And as Helen mentioned earlier, we exist as an area agency on aging because of the Older Americans Act, federal legislation that started back in 1965. So being able to keep people active in the community and giving people a sense of purpose and ensuring that they're engaged and not socially isolated. It also is also very important. And these are also opportunities, for example, at our senior centers, that we will have someone come in and talk about these issues with people. We'll have presentations. We do evidence-based classes that help with fall prevention and chronic disease self-management. Tai Chi for arthritis. So there's people, we don't want them going through this at home and isolated. There's opportunities in the community for people to engage while they're still well.
So if you had a clean slate looking at aging in Northern Virginia, what would success for the aging population look like to each of you?
I can start on that. So if I could have kind of my dream for older adults, it would be to find ways for people to maintain a sense of purpose, maintain their quality of life as defined by them for as long as possible. I think that sometimes we let perfection be the enemy of good, that we get very, from that regulatory standpoint, maybe even a little over obsessed with this concept of safety and how that balances with quality of life. So that really, I think, would be my focus, how to provide opportunities for people to continue to live in a way that felt productive to them.
So I think for me, similar to Heather, it's to have those, to have all of the services and supports that we need to enable people to live independently how they want to live, to be able to access, the community environment. And so really it is about those services and supports being available for everyone in the community and for them all to know that they're there and to utilize them.
Too, I'll just touch on sometimes the funding that we receive is challenging. We're very grateful for the funding, but it comes with a lot of restrictions, and sometimes it doesn't meet the needs of our community in the exact way that the community member would like to see it meet their needs. So some of the regulations around funding sometimes are binding. We're very thankful for it. I'm not saying that, but having a little bit more flexibility with our funding sources to best serve our community members would be helpful.
So I think you said to dream, so this will not be a reality, but I'm going to tell you my dream is that I love the concept of time banking. If you're not familiar with it, look it up. Actually, the founder of time banking, his memorial service is at 4 o'clock today. His name's Edgar Kahn. And what time banking says, it's a new form of currency where an hour of help for somebody earns you an hour of something that you can receive. And in my dream world, we would have that currency of time banking out there. And so when I'm a little league coach at, age 32 for my kids, and I accumulate hours of volunteer help, that maybe sometime later in life when I'm a solo ager, I can draw on that currency and the community is going to support me. And I think there's lots of programs out there that provide community support. The problem is it's tapping into them. And it's also, the other thing is, it's very hard for people to ask for help. And so like, if you knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, Mrs. Jones, I see that you're having difficulty getting the newspaper, here's your newspaper. It's like, well, what do you, sometimes people will react differently, but having platforms that make it easy to give and easy to receive, that's my dream for Northern Virginia.
I keep thinking freedom within a framework. My dream, I guess, would be that framework, to start the intergenerational and close the gap, to have conversations and incorporation of youth programs supporting older adults, right? To then come to the healthcare for everyone to be equally educated on the continuum of care and for our physicians to start communicating and coordinating, because it shouldn't be pocketed for services that are available or the way that we treat people based on we are now aging with a mental health diagnosis. We are aging with a dementia or an Alzheimer, right? You are aging and your mind may be clear, but your body has given up, so you fit into this bucket. We need to eliminate the buckets and put a framework together so that we can navigate people in the right direction without any barriers. The funding that comes from that through Medicare needs to be better implemented, because years ago there was a personal home helper waiver that was put into place where managed care organizations were selling policies based on getting personal care hours through Medicare. Well, then when those policies were purchased, there was an open enrollment period. If families didn't sign up for it, they didn't get it, right? But they signed up for the managed care because of that reason. Then those who did sign up for it, the reimbursement is equivalent to a Medicaid rate, so they couldn't find anyone that would service the hours. So we have, family caregivers and unpaid hours. We came up with ways to do that through consumer-directed care, through Medicaid, right? But what we did is we made it so hard on the agencies that support that consumer-directed effort and held them accountable and lowered their reimbursement so that they could no longer manage because they weren't in the home and it was family-guided care, because that was the goal, to reimburse the caregivers. We need to fix the framework. And then we can allow people the freedom within that framework to make choices that give them that head and heart alignment.
Wonderful. So I do invite everyone who has questions to the index cards or Q&A on Zoom. There's a few that have come up here. Just real quick, why do the AAAs only serve 60 plus? Is this federal law?
Yeah, that's the age group that is stipulated by the Older Americans Act. But we actually, so funding that we get from the Older Americans Act is targeted to individuals who are 60 and older. We do serve individuals who are under 60, generally through our Aging and Disability Resource Center, but it's usually other funding sources that we have to use to serve those individuals.
Yes, and anybody, regardless if you're 60 plus, can call for information. So if you're a caregiver, you can call an agency on aging and they'll help connect you to services. But yes, tied to the funding is 60 plus. But like Helen said, other sources are able to help us support community members that are talking about aging issues or may need services. So it's not technically just 60 plus, but the community as a whole is who the agencies on aging serve.
So there seems to be a consumer demand for multi-generational and integrated housing in neighborhoods. What will it take to increase the supply? We've touched on it a little bit about affordable housing.
Well, one of the ways that we can do that, and we're in control of that, is the Golden Girls way of living, or home sharing, which is actually becoming way more popular with the older adult and combining college kids and older adults together. That's a wonderful way where we don't need to build new homes, because that's a long process and you've got a set amount of inventory. But home sharing is one of the solutions. Another little segment that many of you may not be aware of is a segment called co-housing. And these are neighborhoods that are created and the neighbors intentionally move there because they want to help their fellow neighbors. You can search it up, and there's a national directory of co-housing communities. And there's even seniors co-housing communities, which again, I'm not the biggest fan of that, because I think co-housing for all generations is better than seniors co-housing, but we're progressing. Anytime we talk about housing, it's tough, because building a building and there's some housing folks in here, building a building with 100 apartments is no easy feat, and it takes years and years and years. We got to figure out how we can transform our neighborhoods into caring neighborhoods and supporting neighborhoods with the existing housing inventory that we have.
I agree, because one of the studies that we just saw, and there was a presentation, is it Greenhouse Project? Greenhouse Project is a company that is helping design these homes, right? But they have to find the investors and they have to find the land. There is not enough land equity in Northern Virginia, right? We don't have enough. So, which is why you see multi-level dwellings, but with multi-level dwellings, it comes an impedance for those that are disabled, handicapped, aging in place, because they cannot get to it. So I agree, the land is an issue, but with the Greenhouse Project, if we could start with legislation with some of these builders, when they build into neighborhoods, they have to give into schools, right? They have to contribute to roads. They have to contribute to a sustainable ecosystem for that neighborhood. So why can't we do the same thing with older adult communities? Why can't we regulate some of the privately held assisted living memory care communities to have more auxiliary grant beds, or to put money back into the community to build sustainable, affordable housing for our older adults, right? There's a lot of land that's available and privately held, but if there was a tax incentive for those companies to have low-income housing on their land, most of them would take it.
And I think one of the barriers that we see locally is, what are our zoning laws? How many people that are unrelated can reside in a home together? So there's different things at the local level that are impacting how people can reside and age in different situations.
So another question, what improvements in funding and/or law enforcement could be made to combat or prosecute elder financial abuse or exploitation? That's a tough one.
I'll try. That is a very tough question. Sometimes people make a choice to give funding, to give their money away. We had a presentation from the police department last year on World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, and they talked about in our community residents that are meeting people online, or people are calling them and they're developing that companionship with the person. They call them every day. They call them every other day and check in on them. So they feel comfortable giving their money to these people. The police have tried to explain to them, they're taking advantage of you. And they say, but I'm okay with that. So we also have to remember that as an adult, people have a choice of what they're going to do. So not everything can be prosecuted or brought forward. And I think the overarching issue of scams, not just with older adults, but anybody in the community, is just such a large issue that I'm not really sure how that can be faced, aside from educating people on what these current scams are, what people are doing, clicking on links and emails that come to you, and really we are forward facing this issue with education in the community and making sure people are aware. But it is very challenging to take that next step once it gets to law enforcement and the Commonwealth's attorney to actually prosecute these issues. So that's, I would say, forward facing.
I can't speak to the prosecution side. That's not my area of expertise, but I think something that we see, and I know my colleagues who do this work see, is sometimes an elder will realize that they have been the victim of fraud or a scam, and it is so humiliating to admit that it's happened, that they don't know from that kind of emotional perspective how to get the help and the support that they need. So I think it's just really important for us to ask the right questions and to create that kind of safe space for people to feel comfortable being vulnerable if they've gotten involved in something like this. Because it's terrible to realize you've been, and sometimes they'll just double down because they don't want to admit that it's happened. It's a terrible violation. So I think creating that safe space so that people don't feel embarrassed to get the help they need.
I think it's also important to educate anyone that is forward-facing with our elder care, from caregivers to nurses, because not only is it about financial exploitation, right, or frauds or scams, we're all waiting on that uncle who died in the Philippines who left us $1 million if we send him our bank account information, right? But for the reality, that's not going to happen for most of us. But what we are not hypervigilant for, and what we're not seeing, and what we saw a tremendous increase during COVID was the strain of the mental health of the caregivers then increased the domestic violence against our older adults, right? And domestic violence, we always think it's going to be spouse to spouse or boyfriend to girlfriend. It's going to be mother to child. But domestic violence and the elder abuse that goes on, a lot of the times our elders, when they go to live with an adult family member, you'll have a caregiver go in and they're like, oh, that's just how her son talks to her. That's just how her daughter handles her. Would you want me to handle you that way? Right? That there are education, there are interventions and tools, and it's not always maybe in an intentional case of abuse, but it may be out of frustration or out of the mental health of that person, that caregiver is, and they're not receiving any respite services, they're not getting any support, they're not getting any education. Think about dementia as a whole. How many times have you heard someone say that's the disease, not the person? Well, if you are not educated in any form of dementia or Alzheimer's, how do you know that? We're insistent to bring somebody back to our reality. And that gets frustrating because they don't understand, right? Education, education, and advocacy.
Well, wonderful. I want to thank each and every one of you for your time today, and let's give them a round of applause, please. Excuse me. You've helped us to understand the system. You've highlighted and explained the challenges, and you're highlighting some of the goals for the future. And I think there are a lot of solutions out there. And I think it starts with education, it starts with the community, it starts with our network, and it brings everybody together so that we're all rowing in the same direction and not so fragmented. So I think there's been a lot that we've had to take away today. And again, thank you so much. So I'm pleased to welcome to the stage Eileen Ellsworth, who's the president and CEO of the Community Foundation, to close us out.
Thank you, Catherine. I get the best job of the day, simply to thank everyone. So first of all, thank you all for coming and the broad community interest in this topic. Thanks, Catherine, Dorothy, Steve, Sarah, Helen, and Heather for sharing your thoughts and expertise with us this morning. Also, a special thanks to Rita and Melissa, our keynote presenters, Elizabeth Hughes, the Senior Director of Insight Region, for yet another brilliant data-driven report, and Drew Wilder of NBC4 for emceeing our event this morning. Thanks to the Community College for hosting us. They're great friends. Thank you to all of our 14 presenting partners. Every one of you are institutions of renewal here in Northern Virginia, and we are proud to call you our friends and our partners. Thank you to our program fiscal sponsors as well, those who helped ensure that the Community Foundation continues to have the capacity to host discussions like this on the core needs of our region. Today, all of those that appeared here in person have received a copy of our new report, Growing Old Together in Northern Virginia. And for those of you who are online, we're going to mail a copy to you in the next couple of days. And you can also access a digital copy right now at that link right there, cfnova.org/aging. So I just wanted to share one thought I had as I was sitting here today. You know, we're talking about massive civic change here, and it seems daunting. But civic change, it is never, ever possible without some measure of civic idealism. It is simply not possible without some measure of civic idealism. So let's hold up that dream, you know? A region where our aging population not only has its basic needs met, but also where older adults feel that they can connect, they can belong, they have purpose and meaning, and they feel valued and loved. That's our image for our aging population here today that we're going to hold dear in our hearts. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you next year.